Hello, I'm Eric Matisik, co-chair of Denver Startup Week. Last year, we were able to bring the global audience together for Denver Startup Week, and this year, we're excited to welcome that global audience back as we celebrate and showcase the best of entrepreneurship that the Denver ecosystem in Colorado has to offer, in Denver and beyond. There are lots to explore this week, but most importantly, we're excited that you're joining us. We have nearly 50 sponsor companies who contribute to make Denver Startup Week possible. Let's show our love for these companies today and all week long. Thanks to our headquarters and title sponsor, Amazon, and our title sponsors whose leadership makes this week come to life, Capital One Cafe, the Downtown Denver Partnership, Fluid Truck, Hotel Engine, and WeWork, and our track sponsors who've made all the great content you're hearing today possible, which includes our founder track sponsor, Kickstart, our growth track sponsor, Friday Health Plans, developer track sponsor, Quizlet, product track sponsor, Palantir, design track sponsor, Battery 621 and the Public Works, people track sponsor Exactly, and the spotlight event sponsor, Strat Labs. Our headline event sponsors are bringing this excitement to the entire week. Thank you to B-Side Fund, Colorado Public Radio, Comcast, Coors Brewing Company, Denver Pavilions, Entrepreneurship at the University of Denver, Gusto, JP Morgan Chase, Method, Moss Adams, Pi Insurance, Promontory Mortgage Path, Red Bull Basement, Southwest, Tattered Cover, and the VF Venture Foundry. Finally, thank you to our sponsors and member sponsors who are listed on the screen, and thank you for your support of Denver Startup Week. Now, let's get to it.
Yeah.
Hey boss, Mountain West Q2 forecast, 2.3 million.
Nice. Are you kidding me? Come on.
Ugh, another one.
Welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm Ashley.
And I'm Emma. We are the People Track co-chairs and members of the Denver Startup Week Organizing Committee.
Thank you for joining us for the 10th anniversary of Denver Startup Week. At Denver Startup Week, we strive to make all of our sessions a space where attendees can connect, learn, and grow, regardless of age, gender identity, gender expression, race, ability, or sexual orientation.
A special thank you to our sponsors for their support in helping us to keep Denver Startup Week free and accessible for all, especially our People Track sponsor, Exactly.
On that note, please enjoy the session and the entire Denver Startup Week.
Hello there, and welcome everyone. We are so excited to have this opportunity to have a really important discussion around caregiving and the workplace. We are excited to have the discussion that all too often doesn't happen as often as it should. And I am gonna get this slide situation together in just 1 second here. All righty. So it's caregiving in the workplace. Real Talk, Real Solutions, presented by the Caregiver's Guardian. I am thrilled to introduce my partner, my dear friend and colleague, Michelle Adams.
Hello.
Michelle is a seasoned attorney, speaker, coach, and newly titled author. She is passionate about helping people live their lives purposely with a focus on establishing their personal legacy. This passion is conveyed during her numerous conference presentations across the United States and Canada, and further reflected in her first book titled Family Strong, 7 Gifts for a Lasting Legacy. She is the founder of Hello Legacy, a training and personal development company, and the law office of Michelle Adams, LLC, where she helps families in the areas of estate planning, elder law, special needs planning, and family legacy planning. Additionally, she is an adjunct faculty member at Metro State University of Denver, where she teaches a course on child abuse. Her work is not just business, but personal. As a wife and mother of 2, she is dedicated to championing organizations that support and empower women and children, but most importantly, that strengthen families. Help me welcome Michelle Adams. Yes.
Thank you so much, Nadine. I'm so excited to be here to talk about this topic with you. It's so important, and they couldn't have picked a better person to really let folks know what they need to know about what it means to be a caregiver in the workplace and some of the challenges and the opportunities. So let me take this moment to officially introduce you as well. So Nadine Roberts Cornish, certified senior advisor, gerontologist, author, and national speaker, is founder of the Caregivers Guardian, LLC. With a background in public health, Nadine began her most important role as a 15-year caregiver to her mother. Her personal journey would morph into a now 13-year-old business. Congratulations to you on 13 years. TCG has been providing care management, coaching, and consultation services to family caregivers across the country. CARE is a newly minted program of TCG for caregiver advocacy and resources, empowering employees and employers. And yes, CARE is an acronym. We'll show that to you later. Nadine is the author of Tears in My Gumbo, the caregiver's recipe for resilience, and Prayers in My Gumbo, the caregiver's recipe for peace, which are all part of the multi-book Caregiver Gumbo series. In creating the series, Nadine has also launched a movement she calls Carosity, the Carosity movement, where her mission is to spread the message of caring around the world. She invites individuals, organizations, and businesses to join her on this most important endeavor. She is the founder of the 10-10-30 campaign, 10 random acts of kindness, 10,000 books to caregivers in 30 days. It's now in its 2nd year, and in honor of National Family Caregivers Month, it's held in November. So we are excited to hear more about that as well.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Michelle. Okay, let's get this party started. Okay, let's do this thing, okay?
We love the technology.
Love it. There we go. Okay, so the first question is, who is a caregiver? We definitely would like to have an interactive session. We invite you to make your comments in the chat. We will respond to your questions. We will acknowledge your comments. And so we want to start with who is a caregiver. And I'd like to know if any of you are actually caregivers at this point in time. If you are, indicate so in the chat. So the interesting thing about a caregiver, being a caregiver, is that of the nearly 60 million caregivers that we have in this country at this point, there are a lot of those individuals who don't acknowledge themselves as a caregiver. They don't define themselves as a caregiver. If they're a spouse or a partner, they simply say, hey, I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do in terms of taking care of my wife, in terms of taking care of my partner. I don't consider myself a caregiver, even though every single day they are actively involved and engaged very much in the role of caregiving. So caregiving is officially described as an individual who cares for and provides activities of daily living, those activities that we take for granted, the things that we've done independently all of our lives that we need support with. And so that caregiver is the individual that's assisting them to ensure that they're able to do those activities of daily living. Anything from mobility, being able to go from point A to point B, to feeding, preparing a meal and feeding themselves, to just simply taking care, grooming, toileting themselves. Okay, that's what we think about when we think about caregiving. But just a couple of weeks ago, I talked to a firefighter who literally takes his mother to doctor's appointments on a very regular basis. He goes over to her home just about every day. He does the laundry, and he never considered or thought of himself as a caregiver. And it wasn't until we had the discussion and I informed him that he was indeed a caregiver, that he acknowledged, yeah, wow, I guess I am. But because, there's still so many things that she can do, I didn't think of myself as a caregiver.
Yeah.
And so
I was just going to say, it's like those selfless acts that we do, and we just don't think twice about it. It's just something that either because this person is someone special in our lives that we feel we need to do it or we want to do it, or we're just doing it to be perhaps even a good neighbor to someone else. It may not be in a formal capacity, but it could be picking up someone's mail, if they're too ill to go down and to the mailbox and get it themselves. And just real quick, it doesn't seem like anyone has said that they are a caregiver, but I'm wondering, and I think we all could put a thumbs up on this. Do you know someone who has been a caregiver? Because I think what do you say, Nadine? We either are or...
Yep, there are 4 types of people in the world: those who have been a caregiver, those who are a caregiver, those who will be a caregiver, and those who will need a caregiver.
Yes. Yeah.
Indeed. And so, because I know we're talking to folks in the workplace today, and that's where our emphasis is, that's where our conversation is absolutely going to shift. And so I've got a number up here for you, and that number is 30 million. And this number represents the number of individuals as of 2015, because we don't have more recent data indicating the exact number of individuals that are currently in the workforce that are active caregivers. But in 2015, when this research was done by AARP and the National Alliance of Caregiving, they determined that it was 30 million people that identified as caregivers within the workforce. That means that they were in fact caring for a loved one. They were in fact doing all of those, assisting with those activities of daily living, doctor's appointments, supporting a loved one who may be disabled, supporting children. But this is specifically geared towards individuals who need assistance. This does not include the number of individuals who are parenting as caregivers, okay? So just wanted to provide clarification along those lines. The next figure that I have for you is 1 in 6. That means that 1 in 6 employees within the workforce are actively caring for a loved one, whether you know it or not. And what's really interesting is that nearly 57% of those caregivers say that they don't share the information that they are caring for a loved one with their supervisor, with management, that this is something that they typically will keep to themselves. And so we're going to get into what is it that we can do around having the discussion and being open-minded and receptive to the idea that we are all sooner or later caregivers, and that acknowledging that is step one to actually remedying and finding solutions around what is definitely going to be a prevalent situation for all of us in the workforce. Okay, the next figure I have up here, Michelle, is 69%. So 69% of that 30 million rearrange their work schedule. They acknowledge that they've had to rearrange their work schedule in order to care for a loved one. They have to decrease their hours. They can't continue to work the 40+ hours a week that they were able to work prior to the caregiving responsibilities. And they take unpaid leave. That's a huge impact. A huge impact on the workforce. It's a huge impact on the bottom line. And until we're ready to actually deal with this, and I suspect that most of you that are on this session today are interested in actually finding solutions around what do we do with something that's not going to go away. There's another statistic that I talk about all the time, and that number is 10,000. The number of people who are turning 65 years of age every single day. That means if we're fortunate enough to still have parents, our parents are part of that number. Our grandparents are absolutely part of that number. Our favorite aunties, our relatives, they are aging. And because we're able to live longer with chronic illnesses, the reality is that caregiving is going to be with us for a long, long time to come. Okay, the last statistic I have for you right now is 39%. And in the chat, I'd like you to share, what do you think that 39% means? 39% as it pertains to the workforce, as it pertains to caregivers in the workforce. Any thoughts?
I feel like we should have like Jeopardy music on.
But that 39%, Michelle, care to take a guess at that one?
Honestly, I'm thinking I was going to put question marks because I don't know.
Okay, so that 39% is the number of employees who are leaving the workforce. And mind you, these statistics are old compared to what's happening right now that we are in the midst of a pandemic, okay? 39% of that 30 million figure that I showed you, that's the number who are leaving the workforce. And they're leaving the workforce because they can't afford the cost of care for a loved one, whether that's in-home care or whether it's care in a facility. They're leaving the workforce because they don't have the flexibility that they need to be able to juggle caring for a loved one and work as well.
Yeah.
And they're leaving the workforce because they don't have access to paid leave. Family medical leave for many is great and they access it, but they don't get paid when they take FMLA. And as a result, many workers are having to make the tough decision to leave the workforce as a result. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the slide right now and come back to all of you to get to see some of your faces or not. Definitely your names, that's for sure.
Yeah, Mindy was just as surprised, I think, as most of us were to see that 39%, the fact that so many people were leaving the workforce because of these types of issues. And I'm glad Mindy, that you are, because so many people, unfortunately, when they're starting up a company, you know, this is probably the last thing on their minds. They're thinking about cost and, you know, resources and paper and technology and things along those lines. But the most critical element are the people. And if you spend all this time, energy, and money training people, and then they end up having to leave because there's been no formal structure in place to support them, then not only was that a waste of those resources, but it's unfortunate that we weren't, and I say that in a collective sense, we weren't able to support that employee during a time when they really could have used just one little thing to help boost them to be able to do not only the work at work, but also the work that they would do at home for the caregiver. So Nadine, those were very eye-opening stats. Were you going to say something else to that?
No, just really, it's all around us, right? And we have turned a blind eye to it. And
That's
so
right.
I'm really appreciative of everybody that's here today and everyone listening to this, because there are so many more stats, and I didn't want to bombard you with a lot of stats, but there's so many more that tell the story of what's happening. The writing is on the wall, and we've got to address it. And that's what we're going to do today.
Yeah. So Nadine, I think this would be a good time for you to share, because you've done so much work with other companies who are trying to do what Mindy is doing, what I believe, you know, I suspect a lot of people on the call, perhaps they're starting to build their company and they want to make sure that they're doing it right. They want to stay away from perhaps what some of the traditional bigger companies have done or failed to do as it relates to taking care of their workplace. So when in your work with these employers, what do you see as common themes as it relates to what they do or fail to do as it relates to caregiving?
Absolutely. So what I want to do is set the groundwork for the fact that I've had 13 years of working with primarily with a focus on the caregiver. Mm-hmm. And of the more than 3,000 caregivers we've served, 90% of those caregivers, they were workers. They are workers. And so we know caregiving, and with 90%, we absolutely know caregivers who are working. And so with that in mind, 2 years ago, we conceptualized CareRe to support caregivers in the workplace. And some of the common issues that we've run across include, first and foremost, employers that will not acknowledge that caregiving and the workforce is a problem, that their employees are being impacted by the demands of caregiving, the challenges and the stressors associated with that. And I'd like to think that the pandemic has absolutely shed more light on the issue, but we need to do more in terms of acknowledging the issue, and most importantly, Michelle, having that conversation in the workplace, right, and not acting like it's a taboo subject. Again, we said we're all caregivers sooner or later, so having that conversation is absolutely positively essential. Another challenge that we have discovered is a lack of training on how to be a compassionate leader. The number one leadership quality, what do you think the number one leadership quality is? Anybody but Michelle right now, because I know she knows the answer to this one. Yes, Mindy, ding, 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 you got it. It is empathy. That is the number one leadership quality. And if we start from the top down in terms of how the culture within the work environment is established, it starts from the top. And if we have a lack of empathetic leadership, we unfortunately will have a workforce that's not very empathetic to what's happening around them. And unless you keep the blinders on, it's impossible to go through your work week without recognizing and acknowledging that there's a coworker that you're relatively close to that's dealing with caregiving challenges. So empathy is huge, and compassionate leaders are an absolute must. I saw a really interesting comment, Michelle, from Mindy. Would you grab that one?
Yeah, so I responded where she
Mhm.
says that, you know, a lot of these folks refuse to follow unsustainable, irresponsible business models, or she refuses to follow unsustainable, irresponsible business models. And then she was curious how many of that 39% that you mentioned are women. I responded, but I'd like to know, if I said the majority are women, but men represent a significant number as well.
And we're going to get into that.
Yeah.
Literally, Mindy, 61% are women. The number of men who are caregivers in the workforce is really, it's really surprising, right? Because men stay quiet about it. They don't talk about it. They don't share what's going on. And they're very much a part of that category of caregivers who don't self-identify, as in the example that I gave about the firefighter who every day, every other day is seeing and looking after his mother, taking her to appointments, but he does not identify, if he did not, I should say, identify as a caregiver. Yes. And yeah, 61% of women, gross, absolutely, and 39% of men are active caregivers. And again, all of the statistics I'm sharing with you are just prior to the pandemic. They're working feverishly now to try to get more up-to-date numbers on the reality of the caregiving situation as it exists, you know, since we are in this season of pandemic, and we continue to be. Okay, so another point that I wanted to make in terms of what some of the common issues and barriers are, a lot of companies will have an EAP program, employee assistance program, and that's great, but they haven't updated the program. Or they feel like, okay, we've got a manual, a resource manual that we can give to people, that's sufficient. And I can tell you that is absolutely not sufficient. The last thing that you need when you are in a crisis mode dealing with a caregiving challenge is to have to go through a manual or to go online and try to find the information that you need. That can be really, really frustrating. And so really updating the support systems that are in place is absolutely essential. And it is a common issue in terms of what some employers tend to think, well, we got that covered, when in fact, it's not sufficiently covered at all. Another problem is not providing paid leave. I mentioned that earlier, that FMLA is great, and to be able to access FMLA is great, but for so many employees, it's not a viable option because they can't afford to take the time off without pay. So paid leave is an absolute huge incentive and necessity around ensuring that that your employees are taken care of. Another one is a misconception that this is just a boomer issue. This is, you know, what the folks over 50 have to contend with. And again, I've got some real interesting statistics around the percentage of individuals that are not boomers who are in fact caregivers. And it's really important for startups, those of you that are startups, to really pay attention to this number, because you're going to be recruiting individuals for your businesses. And it's really important that you have a viable caregiving policy in place, because that will be an attractive factor for those you are attempting to bring on board. So 7% is the number for, you mentioned those glasses earlier?
Yeah.
I think I need to put them on. 1 second. Okay, all righty. So for Gen Xers, we've got 29% who are actively caregiving in the workforce. For millennials, we're at 23%. And Gen Z,
they're the ones being taken care of.
at 6%. 50%, right? They're also providing care, especially in this season of pandemic, right?
Yeah.
So many young people are, in fact, caring for loved ones. Statistically, we've got latest stats that show we've got 3 million kids between the ages of 10 and 18 that are caring for a loved one in the home.
And can you imagine, just to go to the millennial generation for a minute, and I forget what ages that goes up to, but 1 in almost 4. So just think, if your workforce is predominantly of that age group, a quarter of them, just about a quarter of them, will have some type of caregiving issue. And it goes back to one of the points that you made of wanting to make sure that people feel free to be able to discuss these issues. But we'll expound a little bit more on that with the tips and strategies. But yeah. And is there a final one that you want to share with folks?
I think the final one would be a failure to provide a way to continuously support the caregivers in your organization, right? It's one thing to recognize and acknowledge, and then to say, okay, well, this is available for you. But especially with dementia, having the impact that it's having, and let's talk about that for a second. 25% of caregivers are dealing with dementia-related illnesses. And most of you are familiar with Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is the most common type of dementia. And I think it's about 85% of all dementias are Alzheimer's dementia. But that other 15, that's over 100 other types of dementia. And for those of you who know anything about that disease, it's pretty devastating. Most recently, Tony Bennett was highlighted on 60 Minutes, and they showed, the impact. He doesn't remember much of anything, but he can still perform. The power of music is still so amazing in his world. He was literally able to perform, I believe, a couple of months ago, and that was pretty astounding. But many of us, 25% of the caregivers, are dealing with a type of dementia. And so what that means is that is a long-term illness in most instances. And so if you've got an employee who's caring for someone with dementia, particularly in the home, there are going to be some really stressful days. There are going to be many times where they are going to need additional support, understanding, empathy, and some days they're just going to need a hug, and they're going to need to be told that it's going to be okay. And they're going to need to hear that from a familiar face, someone that they work with, that they see, on a regular basis.
Yeah, and as you were saying that, I was thinking about 2 of my clients, and one is a client, the other one reached out to me for some assistance, and one lives out of state. We're here in Colorado, one lives out of state, and her grandmother is the one who's dealing with Alzheimer's, and there's family here, but they're not doing anything. And so she really is that primary caregiver, and she lives, 1,500 miles away. She has to fly back ever so often to be able to make sure that the care that the grandmother's receiving in the facility is up to par. And then I had somebody else who came from another state. Her mom was dying, and thankfully, her employer allowed her to, continue to work remotely and be with her mom, up to that last stage. But think if you don't have that flexibility, as you mentioned, the stress that's on individuals to be able to have to satisfy 2 people at the same time. One, the need to make sure that your loved one is taken care of, but also to make sure that your livelihood is not being jeopardized. So I think, Nadine, you did an amazing job pointing out a lot of the issues that I think so many of us have experienced in the workplace. And if you are in the position now of creating this workplace, don't do those things. So let's talk about the tip strategies that people can implement to make sure that everyone wants to work for their company. Bomb.com, it's like, yeah, we want to sign up for this particular or work here because they get it.
You are so right. How do we become the bomb.com company, the company that will be selected over the competition, right? And one of the things that I suggest you do is create a culture that supports these very conversations. Since you heard some of the statistics, and again, it's just a fraction of what we're going to be dealing with, that this reality is only going to become more and more expansive. Creating a culture of care and a culture within the work environment that says, hey, we have these types of conversations. This is not something that we avoid. This is not something that we pretend is not happening, when in fact, we know that it is. We are all aging, and this society, for the first time ever, we are going to have an elder population that is larger than our population of newborns to 12-year-olds for the first time ever. And so we are absolutely becoming a society of more mature and seasoned individuals. And as a result, we absolutely have to plan accordingly, and we have to be ready for the fact that our workforce will be impacted by caregiving issues on a daily basis. Another suggestion is absolutely providing flexible work policies. Now, this was really a challenge before the pandemic. Now, I'm happy to say that many companies are on board with recognizing the need to do that. And we've also discovered how effective it is for people to work from home. In some industries, they've decided that not so much. But even if your workforce is back to work, back in the office, it is very, very important for your caregivers to absolutely have flexible hours so that they're able to attend those necessary medical appointments, and they're able to support their loved ones as is needed. Yeah. Another recommendation is, of course, as I mentioned earlier, encouraging the Family Medical Leave Act, making sure that employees are able to take advantage of it, as well as offering paid time off when and where possible.
And Nadine, let me interject real quick, because perhaps some companies are not required to follow FMLA because of their size. So even though the law says you don't have to do this, keep in mind, again, if you want to retain those individuals, what was the number? 39%, whatever that number.
Yes.
39%. If you want to retain that 39%, it's really something to be thoughtful about in terms of identifying and clearly mapping out what that policy is going to be as it relates to time off, and thinking about how generous you can be with that.
Absolutely. It's kind of like you pay now or you pay later, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And we always know it's much more expensive to pay later than it is to pay now.
Yeah.
So implementing strategies that will absolutely keep your workforce intact is highly recommended. Mm-hmm. Okay, and have resources that are available, right? And I mentioned that manual earlier, and again, that's a kind of antiquated resource, but important and necessary. And there are a lot of people that love to, use a tangible notebook type of thing, right? Or a resource guide. But online resources are absolutely fantastic. Many of the, in addition to AARP, many of the larger insurance companies now have caregiver online portals. And we at TCG, we are implementing our portal, but I can tell you the most effective tool that we offer is that one-on-one consultation, a 10 to 15 minute consultation, having a conversation with an individual, particularly who is in crisis, that goes so far in terms of being able to tangibly support someone who is maybe in crisis mode or just maybe at their wit's end and need to hear a voice. They need to talk to someone who understands what they're going through and can literally support them through that, through whatever that challenge is that they're addressing at that particular time. And in most instances, we're able to address that challenge in 10 or 15 minutes. And they're able to go back to work and focus on what they're being paid to do, right? So really, really important. The resources are essential, but making sure that those resources matter and are effective is most important.
That's good. Were there any other tips, or did you want to end it there?
I think I'll end it there for now.
Okay.
We got a few more minutes.
Yeah.
There's some things we can expound on, but
yeah. And I was just going to add, we're also used to going into our search engine of choice. Just Google it. Google it.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And we know, and I'm exaggerating, but maybe not, a billion things will come up if you look up caregiving resources, and you'll just have all of this data and information overwhelmed. And so I think it's important, like you said, that sometimes while the technology is great and we're thankful for it, that we can get the information at the tip of our fingers, sometimes there's nothing like talking to a real live human being to be able to get that empathy, to get that compassion, and more importantly, to get customized solutions to whatever their issue is. So
and that is the key. A customized solution is what you need when you're dealing with, especially something you haven't dealt with before, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so thank you for that input and that reminder. And I'm going to switch reels now, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, Michelle Adams. Yes, ma'am. And what is it specifically that you would recommend? Because a lot of the challenge for employees is around the affairs in order, the financial piece and the legal piece. There is so much that, especially an adult child who's dealing with a parent, right, that you don't know, and you never had to think about it because your parents have always been self-sufficient. They took care of you. Mm-hmm. And so just the idea of, wow, I have to get things in order. I have to ask them questions I'm not comfortable asking, questions that they're not comfortable answering, right?
Yes.
And so what is it that you do, and how do you support employee caregivers as they navigate these uncertain waters?
Yes. So, of course, this is my piece, where my passion is, because we've all, and if you haven't, you may experience a situation where someone becomes sick, or perhaps they pass away, and there were not documents, or there were inefficient documents in place, or insufficient documents in place. And the stories go on, but I think about one person I was working with, and they said, oh, well, I have power of attorney to do this. And we look, and it's like, no, you don't have it to do this. You have it to do this part of it, but not what you really need. And so the biggest thing I want to remind people is, as it relates to how the legal component supports the caregiver, is that this is an opportunity for employers to make sure that they're letting their employees know you have to get your legal affairs in order. Please do not wait until the last minute, because then you have situations like Britney Spears is not exactly the exact case scenario that I'm looking at, but you could see all the interest that evolved from that when you hear about the term conservator and guardianship. And let me say this, the reason why I bring it up is because if someone does not have documents in place, then the ultimate resort, the last resort, will have to be going to court to make sure that a judge determines who should be the guardian or the conservator over this person and over their assets. And in some cases, that works out great, but in other cases, i.e. Britney Spears, it did not. And so you want to make sure that you have a plan in place so that the person who is managing your affairs is someone that you trust implicitly, and you know that they're going to do the right thing by you when push comes to shove. So I just reiterate, what are those documents, you ask? Let me share that. So, especially as it relates to incapacity, and incapacity simply means that the person no longer has the ability to make these decisions on, for themselves. So they could be hospitalized, or like you mentioned, they could have a form of dementia, and they're just not able anymore to articulate what their thoughts, wishes, dreams, hopes are as it relates to care for them. And so the first thing they would need to do is make sure that for their finances, they have a financial power of attorney in place. This is so important because without it, then you really do not have the legal authority to act on that person's behalf. And so often, and banks have become even more kind of hard on this, where they want to scrutinize every line, every word, every punctuation mark in these documents. You just want to make sure that they are done correctly, so that if the need ever arises and you do need to make decisions or to transact business on behalf of your loved one, you have legal authority to do so. Sometimes people will add folks to their accounts. That could be a solution, but if someone asks me, I would say, well, it depends on who the person is, because if they have issues, creditor issues, lawsuit issues, etc., and that person is named on the same bank account, well, then that creditor could say, here's an asset, and deplete that account. So you have to be so mindful about doing these kind of stopgap measures, these Band-Aid measures, to get access to a person's account. And so often I see where someone will put the name of the person on the account, where the better thing to do is actually give them financial power of attorney over their assets. As it relates to the healthcare side of things, which is probably something just as important that people need to make sure they have in place, is who's making medical decisions. And here comes the problem when you have, let's say, 3 siblings, and each sibling has a different thought as to what mom's care should look like. And oftentimes the caregiver is really the one who's taking her or him to the doctors and making the appointments, etc. But we need to be clear who has that authority. And if you want it to be multiple people, that's okay. But please make sure that those multiple people all get along and they're all on the same page. So having the medical power of attorney in place allows the medical provider to know who actually has legal decision making. And then of course you want to have your what we call an advance directive, which is to make sure that your end of life wishes are documented. And again, I jokingly say my grandmother, I was not her caregiver, but I might as well have been, because I was living in New York at the time. She was in one part of Brooklyn, I was in the other. And if I couldn't reach her, I got on that train, didn't matter what time of the day or night it was. If I couldn't reach her, I was going there to make sure that she was okay. And I jokingly say, if it was up to me, she passed away in 1995, I would still have her on ice somewhere, right? Because that's just how important she was to my life. But we can't do that. So you want to make sure that her wish was honored. Her wish was, I don't want any heroic measures. When it's my time, it's my time. Do not resuscitate me, let me go. That was hard for me to accept, but it wasn't my decision, it was hers. And so that living will outlines what your decisions are so that your loved ones are not grappling with that decision. They have said, this is what she wanted, this is what we're gonna honor. And the last thing is to make sure that there's the HIPAA release. And HIPAA has been in the news recently because of all things vaccines, but keep in mind that HIPAA is federal law that says medical providers cannot release your information to a third party unless you give them permission to. And this is important because you want your medical decision makers to be able to get your health records, because they need to be able to know, well, what's going on. So HIPAA releases are always something that I provide as the attorney to make sure that whoever they have listed as the decision maker also has the ability to access their medical records. So legal documents, it has to go hand in hand, and those employers whatever you can do to assist that process, to make it easy for your employees to get the help that they need, please consider that as you craft out your plan.
Michelle, that's so essential, that piece. And when we talk about the stressors that an employee caregiver, that they're under, that they are bombarded with, that is the stress reliever, right? Having all of those documents in place, not having to figure out, oh my God, am I doing the right thing? Is this what my loved one really would have wanted? When you never had the conversation, they weren't encouraged. And so I think that this is one of the most important aspects that's provided for, that employers can provide for their employees who are actively caregiving, for sure.
Good deal. And, I wanted to kind of end this with talking about the Careosity movement, because I think this will give some additional tools in that proverbial belt or the toolbox for employers as to how do we create this culture of Careosity.
So Mindy asked a great question earlier about, with her startup, how do I make sure I've got PTO, I've got flexibility in my startup around caregiving. And that's the first step in the right direction. The fact that you're thinking about that, thinking about, what is it that I'm going to incorporate as part of my standard operating procedure. It's foundational in terms of how you do business and even who you do business with. And so this discussion is an essential step in the right direction, beginning that process. Having that discussion, as I mentioned earlier, making that a norm. That's the norm. We talk about that in this workplace. The continuing education piece through Lunch and Learn series is probably one of the most cost-effective and impactful activities that we participate in on a regular. Michelle and I did a collaboration with AARP and Denver Public Library last month, and we did a 3-part series for Lunch and Learn series. And we do it on the lunch hour so that it's not affecting work time too much. A lot of people are flexible with their lunchtime, and when employers allow them to be flexible, they're able to participate in those types of activities where they get information, they are inspired, they are supported and motivated, right? Motivated because whatever the challenge is that they're dealing with around the caregiving piece, that's addressed, that's resolved, and they're able to move on and get back to focusing on what they need to focus on during the course of the day as far as work is concerned. Another strong recommendation is workplace support groups. Are phenomenal. I facilitate quite a few of them, but what we really love is when we're able to start the process and the employees themselves take over the support groups and they facilitate. At CDPHE, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment here, literally they've got over 100 people that participate in the support groups within the workplace. And I'm sure now that things have been virtual, there are many more people participating. And then another really important piece, I did mention that earlier, is providing the virtual 15-minute coaching calls. Actually giving your employees an opportunity to connect with a live person, a coach, a consultant, a care strategist that can help them with whatever that challenge is and move on and be able to breathe, be able to move forward and get back to focusing on what's most important. But what you're doing is you're providing them what they need so that they're able to move forward. And then I would say that the end result of all of that is overwhelm moves from being overwhelmed to just being whelmed, okay? That a crisis becomes solvable, that stress is dramatically decreased, and that health overall is improved. Yeah. And your employee is able to get back to work, and the bottom line that we all care about as business owners is improved, it's enhanced under the circumstances that we deal with.
That's so good. And you said that the bottom line is we want our people to be taken care of so that they can bring their best selves to work every day, whether it's virtual work or whether it's in-person work. And the way to assist in that process is to keep in mind that there are caregivers within your community and how best you can support them. And Nadine, I think it's really good to end on this note because I love what you're doing with I mentioned it in your bio with the 10-10-30 campaign. Do you want to share just a little bit in this last 2-3 minutes about what that is?
I do indeed. If my slide will cooperate with me, I will.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just doing its own little sweet, precious thing. Don't you just love that? But there it goes. Okay. So 10-10-30 is the 10 random acts of kindness, 10,000 books to caregivers in 30 days campaign that we launched last year in the midst of a pandemic because we really wanted to acknowledge caregivers and we wanted to celebrate them. We knew that a lot of attention was being paid to the professional caregivers, rightly so, but we felt like family caregivers were sort of being left out of the fray and in the discussion around with the focus being on professional caregivers. November is National Family Caregivers Month. And so this is October. So guess what? We're now gearing up. We are moving forward with the campaign for this year. Our goal is to have thousands, maybe millions of random acts of kindness done for the caregivers within our community across the country, and to get 10,000 books to caregivers within 30 days. We invite you, your organization, to join our movement, become a sponsor or partner for the campaign. You can learn more at 101030campaign.com. For as little as $100, you can become a sponsor for the campaign. And what's different this year, because we know the overwhelming burden of caregiving that so many people are contending with, is that we have included as random acts of kindness in the campaign virtual facials, so that there's that self-care and pampering aspect that is included in the sponsorship package. The information and resources that so many caregivers needed are included in the books that was mentioned earlier in our bios: Purrs My Gumbo, Tears My Gumbo, and Michelle's book, Family Strong, 7 Gifts for a Lasting Legacy. And also, there was one more thing that I wanted to share, and that is with the sponsorship this year, we actually are incorporating some of the services that TCG offers so that it's a win-win situation for anyone who sponsors and for the community as well. And so we definitely want to encourage you. We are so glad you're here today. We want to encourage you to think about the fact that November is National Family Caregivers Month, and that this is an opportune time to celebrate the caregivers in your family, in your community, and most importantly, in your organization. Acknowledge them, recognize them, and support them.
Love it. Love it. And Nadine, just make sure I captured give the folks your website address.
So that is tcgcares.com.
Okay, perfect. And I typed in the chat for you, tcgcares.com, and then for myself, coloradofamilylegacy.com. And please feel free to reach out to either one of us with any questions that you may have that might not have been covered during this session.
Absolutely. We appreciate the fact that you realize how important this subject is, and that you are willing to implement strategies, policies, and procedures that really afford your organization the opportunity to support your employee caregivers, to celebrate your employee caregivers, and most importantly, to keep them working for you, right? Yeah, to keep them in your organization. That's key. Absolutely.
They are part of the bottom line.
They're part of the bottom line, without a doubt. So again, we thank you guys so much for joining us today. Any questions, comments, you can find both of us on LinkedIn And we hope to see you soon. And we definitely hope that you will consider becoming a part of the 10-10-30 campaign.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.